Volkanovski's entire legacy just got hijacked by a rematch nobody asked for, and tonight you're gonna find out exactly why the UFC forced it into reality.
Beat him, you know. Mosvald and Murphy, I think, on paper are probably more deserving of that title shot, but we don't call the shots. That's up to the UFC, and they've given us Diego, so that's the card they've given us, and that's the one we've got to play.
Dana White drops the UFC 325 card and instantly detonates the fan base by giving Diego Lopez a second title shot in just 10 months, and the backlash hits harder than a spinning elbow from Lerone Murphy. But don't blink, because in less than 60 seconds, I'll reveal the one detail buried inside this decision that flips the entire division upside down.
1 week later, we have Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez. UFC 325 from Sydney, Australia. Vulk versus Diego. There's a bunch of other fights on there. I'll tell you later.
The pros are furious as undefeated killers Movsar Evloev and Lerone Murphy get skipped again, and even the champ Alexander Volkanovski can't hide his shock. Volk admits both Evloev and Murphy deserve the shot more, yet the UFC still throws Lopez at him like a grenade, and he claims the only reason is because they want fireworks for their new era under Paramount. And before you look away, stay locked in, because what's coming up next will change how you look at UFC matchmaking forever.
There was a bit of work involved. Obviously, we all know that I wanted to fight earlier. I wanted, I thought it was going to be December. We thought, Lerone Murphy, December. I guess UFC, and they were waiting for Jean Silva and Lopez. Then they were saying Lopez, and we're like, obviously we're like, and we just fought that guy. Is there more deserving people, whatnot? But everybody knows that I'll fight anyone, right? So whoever they put in front of me, I'll do. But then it was looking like it wasn't going to happen. But then it did happen, which was great. Again, I thought, it was a Mobzar deserving, Lerone Murphy. I thought they were the two guys. They're the guys I called out. UFC really won Lopez. At least everyone knows they're in for a treat. With your Mobzars and Lerones, they're probably, they're more deserving. But are they going to bring a fight like Lopez would? I think the fans are going to appreciate the fight that me and Lopez are going to have.
Luke Thomas unloads on the UFC, saying the backlash is 100% justified and accusing the promotion of slowly cheapening the sport with decisions like this. He says the UFC isn't trying to find the best fighter anymore. They're trying to squeeze every last dollar out of chaos, controversy, and rematches that nobody asked for.
We thought it was going to be either Mosvald or Murphy, or the winner out of Murphy and can't remember who Murphy
and Pico, Aaron Pico.
Yes. And so we had that sort of, it was going to be out of Murphy or Pico, and maybe a Mosvald, but we didn't really have much hope on that. And then when Murphy had that spectacular KO, we said, yeah, it's Murphy, and all indications and everything, led to Murphy. Till Diego had his spectacular KO and everything changed.
According to Luke, this kind of matchmaking damages the brand long-term and proves the fans aren't overreacting. They're finally waking up. And keep watching, because in just a few scenes, I'll reveal why this entire situation puts Volkanovski's career into a deadly checkmate.
Could I ask you, who do you think should fight Vulk next for the belt?
I think Lerone Murphy is making a great job in the last fight. I think he deserved the title shot. But I feel bad for Movsar, bro. I feel bad for Movsar because this guy is still undefeated in the UFC. But I don't know for why this guy pulled out your last fight.
Dan Tom jumps in next and throws gasoline on the fire by claiming Volkanovski is trapped in a lose-lose scenario against Diego Lopez. If Vulk wins, he gets no credit because he already beat the guy last year. If he loses, it could be the final nail in his legendary career, especially now that he's already flirting with retirement after multiple wars.
Dude, you are gonna hollow out your product doing shit like this long enough. It's not just that you're not meeting expectations, you're just not. The fight business has always been one of manipulation. The fight business has always been one of the promoters massaging stuff to get what they want. It's a part and parcel of what they do. This is hardly some new practice, right? But it feels like there are moments in time where you can't really around with that. And that's kind of what we're getting here. We're getting a lot of that. We're getting fights where there's obvious ways to go a different direction and they just don't go that direction, clearly because they've got some other aim in terms of how they want to generate revenue. They're just extracting wealth out of the bout rather than matchmaking for a real clear sense of who's the best.
Dan Tom insists Lerone Murphy has done everything the UFC demanded, while Lopez just brings more attention and star power, making him the easier choice for big events regardless of merit. He predicts that if Vulk wins, he'll defend again against Murphy or Evloev, but if he loses, we might be watching his final walk to the cage.
We both know I know who I think deserves the shot at the title. Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy, to me, deserves a shot at the title. He's done everything the UFC's asked him, but he doesn't scream entertainment, and Diego Lopez does. And it's just in terms of flipping a fight one week, another numbered event the next week, you got to go with the guy who's gonna sell. Like, I think it's important for Paramount to get off to a really good start if they're going to drive subscriptions and want more people to watch. And it's honestly better for the sport itself to have this fight as opposed to the meritocracy of having Lerone Murphy, because he deserves it. I think Lerone Murphy does deserve it, or Movsar, like so it's not clear that Lerone does, or even Movsar, but Diego Lopez, man, he's an entertainer and people watch him.
Volkanovski's head coach Joe Lopez confirms the chaos behind the scenes, admitting even they expected Movsar Evloev or Lerone Murphy to get the shot. He reveals that the UFC originally told them Murphy was in line, especially after that highlight reel knockout against Pico. But everything flipped when Diego Lopez delivered his own brutal KO, and within 2 weeks the UFC informed them of the sudden switch. Joe Lopez says none of this was their call. UFC dropped Lopez in front of them, and all they can do is prepare for the storm.
Do you think this will be Volkanovski's final fight? It's all there, 37 years old. He said his family wanted him to retire after the last one. He's been open about that. It's back in Sydney. He hasn't fought there in 3 years. I don't know. It feels like the stage is kind of set here.
I think if he loses, this might be it for him. You know, I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. Come on, man. Like, it's
of course.
You know, yeah. So if he loses, this might be it for him. If he wins, there's no way he's going to continue to fight until he loses. If he wins this fight, he's going to fight the next challenger, whoever that may be, Lerone or Movsar. But if he loses, this is probably it for him.
Lerone Murphy finally reacts and unleashes pure heartbreak, saying the division isn't about who's the best anymore. It's about who's the most popular. He says the real pain isn't losing the title shot, it's losing the chance to fight one of the greatest featherweights ever before he exits the game. Murphy calls it blatant favoritism and says merit doesn't seem to matter anymore when star power can override everything.
What are they doing? What are they doing with this? Of all the decisions they could make, there's some that we wouldn't have been happy with. Listen, I understand that, like, no matter what, it wouldn't have been ideal. You pick Murphy to fight. Oh, he ain't beat no one. He's acting like he's Tony Ferguson of the division. There would have been these complaints. Like, oh, what? He fucking took Josh Emmett to a decision? Even though that's how Ilya got his belt. Different Josh Emmett, different circumstance. You have an abundance of people to give a title shot here. It's not just Ilya or nothing, you know?
Aljamain Sterling backs him up and calls the situation insulting, saying the UFC skipped Evloev once for Lopez and has now done it again. He says fighters are told the best will fight the best, but the opportunity rarely goes to the one who actually earned it. Sterling points out that Murphy took an insanely dangerous fight against Aaron Pico, knocked him out with a spinning elbow, and still didn't get rewarded. He even adds that he fought and beat the same opponent Lopez did to earn his shot while injured, and still wasn't considered. Sterling says UFC matchmaking isn't what it used to be, and the pattern is becoming impossible to ignore inside his own division.
You got to think about Volk's legacy. Why will it read 2 Lopez fights in a row at the end of his career? You got to think about fresh matchups for him here. Something new. An undefeated guy in Murphy. An undefeated Dagestani in Evloev that has a win over Lopez. That has a win over Aljo. Who would be another option here. And I think Evloev and Aljo's claims are a lot better than Murphy's. But still. Not Lopez. Not Lopez. Aljo's a former champ at bantamweight. Moved up. Yes, he lost to Evloev. Beat Brian Ortega. Beat Calvin Kattar in his featherweight debut. He was a guy on his way to being the bantamweight GOAT. Before he lost to O'Malley, moved up. He's gone 2-1 since then.
MMA Guru erupts and claims the UFC is setting Volkanovski up for the wrong kind of legacy. He argues that Volk's last run should not include a second fight with Diego Lopez when the division is stacked with undefeated monsters like Movsar Evloev and Lerone Murphy.
I want to see Volk versus a hard wrestler again. That's what I want to see. I want to see how he deals with it. I think he'd beat Aljo, but it'd be a fresh name, an interesting name. Same with Evloev. Undefeated. Yeah, undefeated Evloev. I think he might have a draw on his record or something like that. And some split decisions and interesting decisions, don't get me wrong. But an exciting Dagestani undefeated guy on the come up. Volk's answer to that would be interesting to see in the last fight of his career. This is in Australia. Maybe Volk won't retire here. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll still see these matchups. But it's in Australia. And I don't know when this is going to align for Volk again. It might be a couple of years before the stars align to where Volk can defend his belt in Australia again. So this is like a golden opportunity for Volk to win a fight and then just go in front of the Australian crowd. Thanks very much. It was I'm the greatest featherweight of all time, and that would be cemented in my opinion.
Guru highlights that Evloev holds wins over both Lopez and Sterling, making this rematch even harder to justify. He says Sterling would have also been a solid option as a former champion, picking up wins at featherweight. Guru wants to see Vulk tested by a high-level wrestler one more time, saying he'd beat Sterling, but Evloev is the real nightmare matchup. He calls Evloev the undefeated dagger from Dagestan rising through the ranks, and says the perfect ending for Vulk would be facing him in Australia for a legacy-defining final fight.
And a lot of people will say, oh, there's some other guys out there. Murphy, I've been told he's too boring. Lots of love, but you know, maybe on the microphone, not as a fighter, but getting out there and selling fights and shooting and then doing that side of things. Some fighters just take a little bit more time if you don't want to say it with your chest. Muzan Evloev or whatever, no one cares. No one cares. No one cares to see him fight. Aljamain Sterling, UFC hates you, my friend. I love you. I love you. Your rum's outstanding, but the big wigs, they hate you for some reason. Sorry, Cobb.
Mike Heck reacts to the card announcements and says that while Dana White never fears backlash, even he couldn't have predicted this wave of disgust. He says he can't remember a main event being torn apart by fans this aggressively, and Volk versus Lopez 2 is being hit harder than anything in years. He calls it one of the most controversial pairings the UFC has rolled out in a long time. And that's where we leave it tonight. But before you go, remember this: the UFC 325 card isn't just controversial, it's a warning shot for what comes next. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and stay locked in so you don't miss the next explosion coming out of the featherweight division.